Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex, Wolfe, and today we're joined by the fantastic host of the Locked On Raptors podcast, Sean Woodley. Alex, for a full preview of the team and so much more.
Yeah, we're talking Raptors and Knicks. We're both giving some perspectives from both sides. It's always fun to do these episodes with a host of another show. So we talk with Sean about what to expect out of the Raptors this year, where he thinks they're at, whether he thinks it was a mistake to not get more involved in the Kevin Durant discussion. And spoiler alert, he asked us pretty much the same thing about whether the Knicks should have gone more all in on the Donovan Mitchell saga. So there's lots of interesting parallels to take between the teams, as well as lots of huge differences, as we know. And that's all coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, and we want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms. You can check us out on YouTube. You can check us on your favorite podcast platform, wherever you're doing it. Download, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. And if you're looking for a second listen, may I suggest Locked On Giants, because the G-Man Alex coming off a big win as we're recording this. But I'm not even going to mention the other New York team. There's no need to gloat.
How about Locked On Mets? Let's do Locked On Mets, number one show on the Locked On MLB network.
It's just not as look. I'm sure they're great, but it's just the Giants. The Giants are the talk of the town right now. Anyways, who's talking to you? I'm Gavin, Schall, a play-by-play broadcaster. He is Alex Wolfe, the editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrick.land. And today we are joined by, once again, Sean Woodley, the host of Locked On Raptors, the manager of the Locked On Podcast Network's NHL channel, because he is based in Canada. And in the next minute, you'll hear a regrettable comment from yours truly about where Sean ranks on my list of favorite Canadians. Just know that it is a deep fake, not real. So you can ignore and not hold me accountable for anything said in that regard. But without further ado, let's get into it right now with Sean Woodley. All right, guys, as promised, we are lucky enough to be joined by the fantastic longtime host of the Locked On Raptors podcast. It is our favorite Canadian, Sean Woodley. Sean, how's it going, man? How's the weather up there?
I'm so thrilled to know I'm a better Canadian than RJ Barrett. You can't take that back now. I am your favorite Canadian.
I meant currently residing. Currently residing. The qualifier is already in the episode description. You're not going to catch me on that. I appreciate it, Sean. I might have missed that moment.
Gavin, I heard that come out of your mouth, and I was like, oh, what did you just say?
Yeah. Knicks fans are flocking away from the pod to just to find a podcast, frankly, that appreciates RJ Barrett. Locked On Raptors does. Don't worry. Yeah.
if RJ comes on, he's back up to number one for sure. But
you
Sean,
go. Now you have a hook. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about another big time New York basketball player that unfortunately doesn't play for the Knicks, and that we'll start here. A little early history this summer. Kevin Durant, where were you at on the Raptors' pursuit of KD, and are there any regrets? I mean, a team that won its first championship by going all in on a similar talent in a similarly awkward situation where it might not have been a long-term fit, but Masai Ujiri decided to roll the dice, and it paid off in a big way. And this summer didn't make that same decision, not perfectly equal situations. It would have taken a lot more to get him in the building. Do you have any regrets about the Raptors not finding a way to get Kevin Durant?
I certainly don't. I don't think the Raptors do either, frankly. Like, I think the asking price was justifiably ridiculous for the Nets, and the Raptors were never under any pressure to go and offer the best offer, because they were kind of in a position where if they put Scottie Barnes on the table, they're getting Kevin Durant, most likely. But why would you bid against yourself in, like, all right, well, no other team even has a remotely close offer or asset available potentially as good as Scottie Barnes? Why would we go and then, like, play ourselves by putting clearly the best thing that any team is going to give the Nets on the table? It just never made sense. And I think it is a very different situation from the Kawhi thing a few years ago. That version of the team was at the end of like a 6 or 7 year run where there were playoff heartbreaks and getting swept by LeBron and LeBronto and all this stuff. Like, it kind of felt like time to take one last gamble on that team. It was probably going to blow up after a year anyway, had they kept DeMar or not. And it was kind of a no risk situation, and they give up one first-round pick who becomes Keldon Johnson, who was nice, along with Jakob Poeltl and DeMar DeRozan, and they get a championship out of it. Like, even if they hadn't won the championship, it would have been a no-brainer deal for the Raptors. Not so much the case this time around. This is sort of a fresh new team that overachieved last season. They won 48 games, weren't really expected to do that. We're the 5 seed, and they have Scottie Barnes, who is 20 years old and looks like he's going to be a very, very good player, potentially one of the best players in the NBA over the course of the next 10 years. I don't think they felt the pressure to go and make a big move by mortgaging their future with Scottie Barnes. Had there been a deal where the Nets have to settle for like an OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., Precious Achiuwa, and all the picks type of package, they probably pull the trigger. I would imagine that offer was on the table the entire summer. But with Scottie Barnes, he's just too much of a sort of sure thing for the next 10 years, as opposed to a 34-year-old Kevin Durant, who you don't even know if he's going to be happy upon landing in Toronto. So no, I don't think there's any regrets. It would have been nice to get Kevin Durant on the Raptors, but the team is not in a position where they're under any pressure. It's very rare to be in a spot where you can be patient, but the Raptors are very much one of those teams right now.
So we did a big draft of all the teams in the NBA and who we would want to most have over the next 10 years. And I raised eyebrows when we did it. We had a guest on, we did, every team in the NBA. I raised eyebrows taking the Raptors number 2 overall, but it's mostly because of what you just said. I feel like they have a lot of flexibility going forward. There's a lot of upward mobility potentially if Scottie Barnes turns into like a megastar, which I think it's very realistic that he could. There's also a chance that he couldn't, but we'll see how that all goes over the next number of years. Certainly don't want to bet against the Raptors development program, which seems to be amazing compared to the whole rest of the NBA. I'm kind of curious where you stand, though. The reason that I got some raised eyebrows when I took the Raptors number 2 was because like Gavin and our guest Marcus at the time were kind of like, well, do they have like that guy to like potentially turn to in a playoff series and say like, go win us the game? And like,
sure,
I agree with that. I don't think it's Pascal Siakam. I think Siakam's a great, the way I look at Siakam is almost like a supercharged Draymond Green, where he's like a much better scorer, but mostly a guy that's going to kind of hold your team together, provide some ball handling out of the big man spot, great defense, all that good stuff. Then you've got Van Vliet, obviously, who's a really good scorer, but can probably be shut down by the right defensive scheme thanks to his lack of size and lack of overall like separation ability and stuff like that. And then, there's OG Anunoby, who's a talented scorer. Scottie Barnes still working his way there. We'll see how he ends up going. But do you think, I guess that's where the Durant thing comes in. Do you think at any point that this team will feel any sort of urgency to get that, like, I don't know if I want to call it just strictly a volume scorer, but like that like playoff player, that, the guy that you could just hand the ball to and say, go get a bucket? Or do you think maybe that guy is already on the team, because none of these guys that I just mentioned are particularly old either. And a lot of them still have some room to improve.
Yeah, I would say I think you're underselling Pascal Siakam a little bit. Like, he was ridiculous last season. And if you were doing like an MVP poll for the last half of the year, he would absolutely warrant being quote unquote in the conversation, that very wonderful place we all love to be in the MVP race. Like, he would have probably picked up like second half, 5th place MVP votes, which means nothing. You're not going to hang a banner for that. But like, he was fantastic last year. He made an All-NBA team. It was totally deserved. And he was essentially the engine of the Raptors offense. It was not totally dissimilar to what you see with like the Mavericks. Obviously, he's not Luka Doncic, but he was being asked to play as though he were Luka Doncic because they didn't have a whole lot else in terms of creation, especially down the stretch when Fred VanVleet was like horribly injured. He could barely walk. His knees were rubble. And Pascal had like this crazy usage rate. I think he was 4th in the NBA in total isolations last season. And he performed really, really admirably. The playmaking took another serious step, and it had kind of been in the growth phase for a couple of years, but it leveled up last year. And the scoring, I mean, he's an absolute ace scoring around the rim. He, really amped up his mid-range game, and it was mostly like his above-the-break three-point shooting that brought down any of his percentages. He was like he was actually the best Raptor in terms of quarter three-point percentage last season. Like, he kind of did it all while also being the anchor of their defense. He's a lot closer to being quote-unquote that guy than I think a lot of people kind of give him credit for. Do I think he's the best player on a championship team? Probably not. Like, I think that's a lot to heap onto a guy who's 27, 28. 28. Like, I don't know how much more growth there can be, but he's a damn good, like, he's already proven he can be the second or third best player on a team that literally wins the championship. And he is so much better than the player he was back when they won the title in 2019. He's made All-NBA twice since then. He's fantastic. And then I think Scottie Barnes is sort of the guy they think will be that guy at some point. And I think it's fair to look at him and think that's attainable. He can handle the ball. He can score and kind of get to his spots inside wherever he wants at any time he wants with his sort of bizarro, herky-jerky drive and post-up game. He has great vision, like, and is going to be a fantastic defender as well. So I really do think that their reasoning for not going to get Kevin Durant was, well, what if Scottie Barnes is just that guy and he's one of the top 10 players in the NBA in 5 years anyway? Do we really want to go give up something for Kevin Durant, who is not a sure thing to even want to be here? Will they have to maybe reckon with things? I think this year will kind of be a really telling year. By the end of the season, there might be a little bit more information as to, what will Scottie Barnes be? What's the ceiling for Pascal? Does he take another step or no? That all could change. But as of right now, I don't think they're kind of in a rush to go find that guy, because I think they probably think he is on the team in the form of Scottie Barnes. It just might not be right now that he is that guy, but I do think this season we'll start to see the team take shape, where it's Siakam and Barnes as kind of the two dueling heads of the snake, and then everybody else kind of operating in their orbit around them. And I think they're just fine with that, to try to test and see what the limits of those guys are.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Sean to finish up talking about the Raptors, and then Sean is going to grill us on the New York Knicks. So for some interesting Knicks questions, some insights from an outsider perspective, stay tuned. But first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And on top of all that football, Alex, they also have NBA odds, including each team's individual odds to make the playoffs. I am looking for our New York Knicks right now. They have pretty good odds on the Wizards. The Knicks are plus 155 to make the playoffs, minus 190 to miss the playoffs. So if you're feeling good about the Knicks, why don't you head to BetOnline, lay some money down, because it's the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. All you have to do is head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts.
Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is the most valuable NBA player this season. Locked On and BetOnline present the NBA Top 50 Most Valuable Players starting on September 19th, right around the corner. Find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And now we get back into it with Sean Woodley.
Yeah, where do you think Barnes tops out as an offensive player? Because I can't say beyond when they play the Knicks, I've watched a ton of him, but to me, just on a very surface level, even though they're different players in a lot of ways, I see a lot of the same concerns and also a lot of the same things that excite me as I do about RJ Barrett as a guy who can, to your point, like figure out his way around the rim, perhaps is better touch than RJ once he gets there, does have that extra size that makes it a little bit less of a necessity than for RJ that he becomes dominant as a pull-up shooter. But then, you look at outside of Giannis, like the profiles of like all the best scorers in the NBA that aren't centers or Giannis. And it is sort of that, like that mid-range game, the pull-up 3-point volume is obviously so crucial, like how sophisticated their handle is, how explosive they are. Do you see him as someone who can eventually fit the profile of a Paul George type of player, for lack of a better term, or is he more unique, and is he going to be that good, but very much in his own way that's almost separate from the archetype of sort of the dominant big wing that I think Alex was kind of getting at earlier?
I think that is probably closer to it, the latter there, Gavin. Like, I think Scottie Barnes has like this very distinct style of play, and he's also just like insanely strong. Like, that's the thing that really stands out. He was, I guess nominally a wing player on the Raptors last season, but like he was their biggest guy. This is not a team that had anyone over 6'9". Scottie Barnes, I think, it's like he's being wrongly listed at 6'9". He's enormous. Like, he played center for this team, and like it was like, oh yeah, obviously he's the biggest player on the floor. That makes sense. He's just long, he's broad, he's strong, he can move guys out of the way, basically at will, get to wherever he wants to go. I don't think he's ever going to be Giannis in terms of like the physical dominance that Giannis shows, because that's like alien stuff. But I do think if you're going on like a sliding scale from your traditional sort of smooth handling wing, like a Tatum or a Paul George, to a Giannis, who's more of this bruising sort of in your face type of dude. I kind of think he skews more towards the Giannis archetype of just like, good luck trying to stop him because he's just stronger than you are. And sometimes that's all you need in basketball is to be able to get to the rim at will, which I think he's going to do. Like, he was a really good rim scorer last season, pretty solid isolation guy, really can find matchups to exploit. And with the way the Raptors are built, like, there's always someone with a matchup to exploit size-wise as well, because the whole team is 6'8", 6'9" at most times. So they're always able to find those looks, and that really was a big part of how they got Scottie Barnes worked into the offense last season. I would imagine there will be a little bit more in terms of designed actions where he's the initiator, where he's running pick and rolls, things like that this season, as I hope they kind of move Fred VanVleet off the ball a little bit more. But yeah, like, as far as like topping out, I don't think it's crazy to suggest that Scottie Barnes will be a top 10 player in the NBA at some point. Where he figures into the top 10, is he in the sort of swing the title contender tier where you're top 5, or is he more sort of the Jimmy Butler-ish range of guys? Like, I think it's probably closer to the latter, but also he was so far above expectations and was just like this supercomputer of learning basketball and learning from his mistakes all year long last year. I kind of have a hard time putting a cap on the dude. Like, he is really, really special and was super fun to watch last season. I can't wait to see what's in store this year. But yeah, I think the Raptors got themselves a keeper in Scottie Barnes for sure. And I do think top 10 in the NBA is very much on the table for his future. Not guaranteed, it never is, but he's kind of got that vibe about him that he's just like better than everybody else, and he kind of knows it.
Well, so this begs the ultimate question with all these discussions on the Raptors. What do you think happens with them this year?
Yeah, I think the Raptors are going to be surprisingly good. It's kind of their thing. We were talking off air before. The Raptors have hit their Vegas over 8 of the last 9 seasons, and the one season they didn't was the year where the whole team got COVID and they played in Tampa Bay for the season and were getting booed by their home crowd to the point that they stopped letting fans in the building. This team just wins a lot of games. Nick Nurse is really good at milking wins out of whatever roster he has. Even that Tampa season before things went to crap, they were like the 4th seed in the East, and then everything fell apart when all their guys went down. And so, like, they just have a track record of knowing how to pick up wins and knowing how to become a regular season wins machine. How that translates to the playoffs, it might be, kind of similar maybe to the previous editions of the Raptors with DeMar and Kyle, or maybe they're a little bit less equipped for the playoffs than they are the regular season, but that team also didn't really have anything in the way of large two-way wings. That's all the Raptors have, which, as we've seen, is kind of a thing that works out in the playoffs. So, and I think we saw in the Sixers series last year, while they lost because they were at a clear talent disadvantage, Gary Trent Jr. was 6th, Scottie Barnes missed 2 or 3 games with the ankle thing. Like, I still think we saw how that can kind of translate to the playoffs a little bit more maybe than sort of like a guard, small player oriented attack. I think, they're going to be a pretty good team. The fact that the Cavs are, going to jump up probably, and the Nets haven't fallen apart, and the Hawks got DeJounte Murray. Like, the East is going to be a bear, but I kind of think the Raptors have a pretty good shot at being like the 5 or 6 seed. I would have projected them for higher than that maybe before the Cavs and Nets moves and the news that happened with them, but they're going to be right in that mix in the Eastern Conference, and they're going to be a problem for any of those sort of upper contender, upper crust teams as well, because that's just what they do. They were really, really good against the best teams last season, and that led to them having 48 wins. Let's kind of pivot over to the Knicks side of things, guys, because I'm like fascinated by this team. I think they are, kind of a victim of being in a really stacked conference. And if it were a different era of the Eastern Conference, say, the mid 2010s, then the Knicks are probably being looked at like a 5 or 6, as like a 5 or 6 seed. But I kind of view them as sort of on the outside looking in, maybe in that 10th spot, maybe below in the East right now. But I do think there's a guy who kind of has a lot of upswing to him and could really kind of dictate things and be the fulcrum of some sort of expansion of what the Knicks can do. And that's RJ Barrett, your second favorite Canadian. He there's always talk about Toppin and Grimes and Quickly and all these guys. To me, it just feels like Barrett's clearly the best of all these guys. He was the highest drafted, obviously. He seems like he's just obviously the guy you build around if you're the Knicks. And I think trading him for Donovan Mitchell would have probably been a problem. Am I biased in my Canadianness that I like RJ Barrett a little bit more than maybe the average person? Maybe, but what's your read on, like, maybe let's go Gavin first. Like, what's your read on Barrett? How good can he be? How good has he actually been? Like, it's so hard to sort of parse how good actually guys are versus like the hype of Knicksdom and all of that. Where are you at with RJ Barrett, and like how can he sort of dictate the direction of this team going forward. Like, is he at all intertwined with what the upside of this team will be?
Yeah, I think it's still very tricky because I think his first 3 years in the NBA, for his type of game, he's had just about the worst offensive ecosystem that he plausibly
Sure.
could with a coach in Tom Thibodeau who, at least relative to the rest of the NBA, not that he doesn't run some good stuff, but is somewhat lacking in terms of creativity, playing with pretty much always a non-shooting center, which could hopefully change a little bit if he gets some run with Isaiah Hartenstein. But having to deal with Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel throughout the first 3 years of his career, and then Julius Randle, who was a shooter for about half a season, and an incredibly good one for half a season, but that did not sustain outside of that. And the fact that Randle often hijacks the offense and kind of takes over the role that RJ ideally would be playing it. And now that went over a distinct shift the second half of last year, where RJ was clearly the number one guy. It was obvious, coaching staff, team, everyone was on the same page that it was sort of his bus to drive, and he did a fantastic job with that by and large. I think post All-Star break, he was right around 24 points per game. The efficiency wasn't as good as you wanted, but it certainly wasn't terrible. A big thing for him throughout the early portion of his career that he was near the bottom of the NBA in terms of his ability to finish at the rim, but he started compensating in that respect by going from really, really terrible to merely bad and getting to the free throw line far more. I think post All-Star, he was right around 8 free throws per game. That made a dramatic difference. If he could recover some of the shooting that he showcased his second year, where after the first 6 games of the season or so, he was right around 40%. A lot of those were on spot ups. So he needs to continue to make those, continue to progress off the dribble, and find a way to be a consistent defender despite taking on a large load offensively. I think his life, and Alex, I'll throw this to you. I want to say, like, I'll see if you agree with me. I know you agree with me on this. If they get Julius Randle off this team, I think everything becomes a lot more clear. And I think the contract they got him on is frankly fantastic. I think it was pretty fair, even if he doesn't become much of a better player than he was the second half of last year. And he's 22 years old with a vicious work ethic, so he should continue to get better. But Alex, I know you're on the same page with me about being very excited about who RJ Barrett is, and perhaps even more excited about who he could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was going to do like what you just did for Scottie Barnes, Sean, and kind of like set like a somewhat realistic and somewhat lofty expectation, like I think at this point, I would say the lofty expectation would be that RJ ends up in that Jimmy Butler tier, like that would be like the best case scenario for him. I think we use Jimmy Butler as sort of a model for him a lot.
Sure.
And that's a guy that I've been bringing up as far as a ceiling comp for like the last 2 years, really, for him is like, he's not supernaturally athletic. He has great functional athleticism, but more importantly, he has like 99th percentile strength for his position.
Right.
He's been built like a grown man since he was like 16 years old, and that shows. Like he definitely knows how to handle his body and generate contact. And finally, towards the end of last year, started getting some of those sort of star-esque calls. And I think from the All-Star break on, he was like top 4 in free throws drawn in the NBA or something like that. And it was a pretty high number. And he finally started kind of getting the respect of the refs. Granted, you want to see the rest of that efficiency come up. But the fact that he was getting better at drawing those free throw attempts shows that he's starting to maybe get a little bit of respect of the refs around the league now, which is nice. So that's like his ceiling, I think, is like Jimmy Butler. I would say my reasonable expectation is that he probably becomes like a top 30, maybe top 20 player in the NBA. I know all these things are arbitrary, so it's kind of stupid to even say that. But, like let's say
he's a top 22 guy in the league, guys.
Yeah, he's right at 22, maybe 23. No, but like maybe in that like Chris Middleton type tier. And, I don't want to diminish Chris Middleton, who I think is an awesome player too, but like someone who could potentially be the second best player, second best scorer, whatever, initiator on a championship team. That can create shots, hopefully at all 3 levels. I think that that's realistic for RJ Barrett. As far as the part of your question about how linked he is to the Knicks potentially becoming successful, I mean, I think you alluded to it. Like, I kind of agree with you. I'm glad that they didn't trade him for Donovan Mitchell. I think that they just locked him up to a pretty fair deal for a number of years. Granted, Donovan Mitchell isn't exactly on a mega deal either, so it's not like it's not like that would have been a huge thing. Like, oh, you're giving up $30 million RJ Barrett for $50 million Donovan Mitchell. Like, it is only about a $6-7 million difference between the two. That said, like, I think they signed him to a good contract with room to grow. And I think that he should hopefully grow into that contract. I think right now he's not necessarily worth it, but for this next year, he's still on his rookie deal. So you get to judge him through that prism for one more year and then start making a decision starting next summer of like, okay, how smart was this contract to give to him? My overall thought on him to wrap up is I just never bet against RJ because it seems like he has that like 99th percentile work ethic.
That dog in him.
The dog in him, yeah. As some might say, the Mamba mentality, whatever you want to call it. He seems to have that, despite being a number one guy in his like high school class and everything for so long. He doesn't seem to have ever let that get to him. He's always seems pretty humble and willing to work and put in work into his game. And I'm really excited to see what he comes with, to start this season, because it seems like every year he kind of surprises us with some cool new skills. So I think the Knicks could go as high as he takes them, or he could just be that fixture that is there for a long time and is just sort of lying in wait for when they do get that like number one guy to take them over the top.
So they didn't get the number one guy, who I don't know if you deem Donovan Mitchell an actual number one guy or not. There's lots of number one guys. They're not all made the same. But either way, you didn't get Donovan Mitchell. The Knicks did not. Obviously, much has been made of the negotiations with the Jazz not calling back, maybe because they're mad or something about I don't know. It all seemed like a very messy trade negotiation from the very beginning, from going back to when all the Knicks showed up at the playoff game just to kind of creepily scout Donovan Mitchell or whatever.
Or Jalen Brunson. Or Jalen Brunson was there.
There you go. There you go. I'll ask you about Jalen Brunson in a sec, but like Donovan Mitchell, they don't get him. Yeah, I don't think they should have traded RJ Barrett for him. At the same time, like, you got to at some point pull the trigger on one of these guys, and not getting him now, it kicks the can down the road a year or two potentially, and then you don't know what the situation's going to be then. Ultimately, do you think that the Knicks will regret not just sort of ponying up whatever the hell the Jazz were asking for and getting Donovan Mitchell into Madison Square Garden?
I don't think so. And I think that's simply because they didn't have the tertiary pieces that the Cavs have to leverage someone like Donovan Mitchell. And the Knicks alleged big concern, and I say alleged because the final package Knicks were offering was still very, very substantial. And seemingly the reason the Knicks did not want to give up a package that substantial, especially in terms of future pick equity, was they wanted enough of those assets left to make a trade for a second star down the line. I think the counter argument to that is you get Donovan Mitchell in the building, you become, or you continue to be, as they have been the last 2 years, fairly competent, and in turn you attract another star in free agency. But as we've seen of late in the NBA, that's not really the typical pathway for star movement. Guys are usually finding a way to get the biggest possible contract with their own teams and asking for a trade down the road. And in turn, I just think it would have left the Knicks somewhat trapped. I think it's tricky because they don't easily have access to that kind of talent. And I think most people who analyze this team seriously came to the same consensus. Donovan Mitchell is a talent unlike anything the Knicks have on their roster. I don't think anyone, maybe aside from RJ, has the ceiling of a Mitchell, but it wasn't just RJ Barrett in the trade. It was also Emmanuel Quickley. It was also 2 or 3 picks. And I think at the end of the day, whether it was because of the Knicks volition or the Jazz volition, it didn't get done. But the point is, it would have been too much. But Alex, I'll throw that to you as well.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say, I mean, I said this in our sort of post-mortem pod the other day about the Mitchell saga. I didn't lose any sleep over the weekend that the Knicks didn't get him. I just don't think it was, for that price, I don't think it was the right move for them at this juncture, because I don't know that you can throw the farm for Mitchell, which seems like that's what it would have cost for the Knicks. I don't know what their package would have been that would have matched up to Markkanen, Sexton, and Agbaji, but like it probably would have been something. I mean, the thing is, they don't really have those mid-tier pieces like a Markkanen that's like not. I would say that I would rank like Top and Quickly, especially Barrett, Grimes, ahead of Markkanen based off of the potential still untapped there versus what you've seen with Markkanen. But the Knicks don't really have a piece that's like in between that and like Evan Fournier.
Yeah.
So it would have been like, okay, you would have had to sort of overpay on the players. They would have still wanted all the same picks. Like, I just don't think it would have been the right move for them at this juncture, because I think it would have capped them at maybe 5 seed ish, with how the East is right now. And I would much, I wouldn't want to completely push all the chips in for a 5 seed and essentially become like the early 2000s Atlanta Hawks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't do it for me. So I was glad they ultimately didn't do it. On the flip side, I said this too, like, I thought it was a fantastic move for the Cavs.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to watch them because I think that they were in the right position to do it. I just don't think it was the right deal for the Knicks. And thankfully, if some of these floated offers are to be believed, where the Knicks were allegedly offering like RJ, Mitchell Robinson, Obi, I think, and like multiple picks the beginning of the summer, like, I'm really glad that Danny Ainge had the hubris to think he could get an offer better than that and didn't take that offer, because that one would have made me angry.
If only the Knicks had Proto-Markkanen, Andrea Bargnani still on the roster to throw in that deal. They could have made it happen.
Or Porzingis, right?
Or Porzingis. They have it tight. So Jalen Brunson, we should hit on him. Of course, he's the big addition in the free agent signing this offseason. No tampering there whatsoever. Totally clean. They bring in Jalen Brunson, and you figure he's going to kind of drive the boat for the most part with the offense. Maybe Barrett gets a little bit more responsibility this season, but Brunson's going to be the guy who's the primary initiator, you would think. What were your thoughts on the deal? Alex, I'll throw this one to you. Like, was it some people reacted to saying it was an overpay, haha, Knicks. I kind of thought it was totally fine, like very nonplussed entirely, I think, just by Jalen Brunson as a player in general, but maybe that's just my own anti-Mavericks misgivings kind of seeping into my evaluation there. But
we have some of that here.
There you go. But is the Brunson deal like a game changer for this team? Is it like going to set themselves up for something bigger down the line? Or is it just like nice to get a competent point guard? And I know they were kind of hunting and sniffing after Fred VanVleet a couple of years ago, didn't pony up the offer for him there. Whereas they went and got Brunson. Like, what do you think that does to sort of the floor of the team and like where they're going to hang in the Eastern Conference now that Brunson's going to be the guy running a lot of their possessions?
Yeah, I think that's the big question that we're not going to know the answer to until we start seeing some preseason games and stuff. Like, we're going to need to see what the dynamic is between Brunson and, more importantly, unfortunately, if he's still on the team, Julius Randle. Like, there was a pro-am tournament over the summer that Brunson, Randle, and Obi Toppin showed up and played one game for this one team, in this pro-am tournament. They wound up losing the game, which, like, who cares? A bunch of NBA players going, 50% against semi-pros or pros from overseas. Like, that doesn't. I'm not fazed by the fact they lost the game, but a lot of people.
I like the ones who go 100% against the
right.
insurance salesman. That's my favorite.
Yeah, that is the best. But like, the thing that everybody was pointing out during that was that Randle was forcibly still trying to take the ball up every time, even with Brunson right there, and that's the biggest fear, I think, for most Knicks fans, is that, we're going to run into this situation where Tibbs still empowers Julius Randle to be the engine of the offense, and Brunson gets kind of cast to the side, despite, as you said, for a team that's been like wandering the desert looking for competent point guard play for the last like 20 years, they finally have one. And, if they're not then empowering that guy to run the offense, then what's the point?
Right.
As far as the contract, I mean, I've said all along, I think it's perfectly fair. I think people still just have this, especially Knicks fans, there's been 2 notable $100 million contracts under old salary caps that did not work out very well for the Knicks, Allen Houston and Amari Stoudemire. I think that Knicks fans still look at $100 million contracts, and I mean, around the league too. I think people are still just adjusting to that being like a normal number that people get now.
Sure.
But like, you see $100 million, you go, oh my God, $100 million. This guy just got way overpaid. And it's like, no, I mean, he's like the 14th highest paid point guard in the NBA starting this season. That's really not that bad. I think it's fine. And, as far as the tampering, like, I don't think there was that much either. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't.
Tampering's also fine. Who cares? We're all adults here. Tampering's
Also,
fine if you want to do it.
Even just from a pure dollars and cents perspective, I wouldn't turn down an extra $7 million a season either, which is what he would have had to do to go back to the Mavericks, because they were offering the same contract essentially, but with one more year. So they pushed all that salary, to make it smaller. So I don't know. The whole tampering thing doesn't make sense to me. Gavin, I'll throw it to you. I mean, I'll just quickly say, as far as what this does for the Knicks and how it affects their ceiling or whatever, I think this is a move that is just you make this sort of move to build stability and to build a competent team, which the Knicks have, to their credit. Even though they kind of took a step back last year, they have been doing that over the last, few years in the Leon Rose regime, slowly building this team up into something better. I think Brunson is just another move towards that. Hopefully he can retain some of the flash that he showed in the playoffs and build off of that. That would be awesome. But even if he's just the player that he was with the Mavs with slightly more usage, during the regular season last year, then that's fine by me too, because I think he was a really great player, worth that contract even before the playoffs last year. And I don't know if he's going to be like a superstar needle mover like a Donovan Mitchell would have been, but I think that he will, as long as the Knicks empower him to be the leader of the team and the point guard, the floor general, whatever of the team. I think that he raises their ceiling a bit and raises their floor a good deal just by finally having competent point guard play and not like the corpse of point guard X out there.
Yeah, I think the only hesitation on it was how it will impact Emmanuel Quickly going forward, who at least I'm of the opinion, and I think Alex is as well, as someone who could have taken up that mantle and been the next point guard for the Knicks, and I don't know, down the road be roughly as good as a Jalen Brunson. But overall, I just look at it as like adding another hyper efficient, super high IQ player. And the Knicks need as many of those as they can. And I think, Sean, you know this better than we do as Raptors fans, like the cumulative effect you have of adding one of those guys after another. And eventually you have a final product that's more than the sum of its parts. He gives the Knicks flexibility down the road, whether it's because they keep him and they have that rock at the point guard spot, or is it trade chip to eventually include in a deal for a greater star. I think he's going to make everyone's lives easier, even Randall's, as long as he's on this team. But what I'm really hoping for is to see a lot of lineups where he gets to be out there with Quickly, with RJ, with Obi Toppin, maybe even with Quentin Grimes a little bit. And I think the collective passing that those groups have, especially if you throw a Hartenstein in there at center instead of a Mitchell Robinson, is really intriguing. And it will lead to the stretches of the most fun Knicks basketball we've had since 12-13. As far as winning goes, and maybe that's where we'll wrap this up. I mean, to counter our question with you on the Raptors, how good the Knicks will actually be. I think the best thing that could happen to the Knicks this year, I don't think it will, is that they somehow stumble their way into a top 5 pick. So suffice it to say, post the Donovan Mitchell deal falling through, wins are not a major priority for me this year. The only priority I have is that the young guys get the vast majority of the minutes. Julius Randle gets the heck off this team as soon as possible, even if that includes attaching a protected first-round pick for him. And we just get to see what these guys look like together, because what really killed the Knicks in that Donovan Mitchell trade, and what has killed them these last 2 years to some extent or another, is not prioritizing guys they've taken with high draft picks, guys that in Emmanuel Quickly and Quentin Grimes, absolute gems, some of the better picks in recent NBA history. We got to actually prioritize those guys, see what they all look like together. And I think Jalen Brunson is a great vehicle to do that and make it all work. So in that sense, I think he was a fantastic signing.
Yeah, I think I'm with you in that, like, wins probably aren't, like, top priority for the Knicks this year. If they make the 10 seed, I wouldn't be, like, stunned, but I kind of think we'll probably see, like, the Wizards have to try, right? Like, they don't have any other choice. They kind of have to try to go win 38 games and be the 10 seed. Like, God, that bottom part of the East makes me sad. But my last sort of one on this, related to the whole losing thing, if they do go and lose games this year and don't make the playoffs again for the second straight season after getting losing 5 to the Hawks a couple years ago, like, you mentioned competence, and like, it's been competent and like mostly quiet by Knicks standards under Leon Rose in the last couple years. Is there a world in which another rough season where they finish in the lottery gets James Dolan being James Dolan-y again? Like, do you think he could like get weird, get fiery, get like itchy trigger fingered and like just say, all right, well, this isn't working. Let's start anew and completely blow up all the competence that has been established over the last few years?
I think no.
Hmm.
I'll try to keep it somewhat brief because I don't think there's too much to get into here. But like,
Sure.
Dolan hasn't really, outside of firing GMs and presidents that were clearly incompetent at the time.
Sure.
Like Phil Jackson went like fully off his rocker towards the end of his tenure. Steve Mills and Scott Perry, they whiffed on the summer of 19, and then things were underwhelming that next year, and that led to the change there in early 2020. But I think that ultimately the only reason that Mills and Perry got canned was because of Leon Rose saying that he would do the job, basically. Right. Because there was a very quick turnaround. Like, people were like, oh, wow, there's going to be a long search for the next, Pobo or GM of the Knicks. And then like 2 weeks later, it was like, okay, Leon Rose is president now. Like, deals are being finalized. He's closing up all of his, all his books at CAA, but he's going to do it. So it seemed pretty obvious to me after the fact that Dolan had spoken to him already. He said he would do it. And he was like, heck yeah, let's, I'll move heaven and earth to make this happen. Let's just do it because I've wanted you to run the Knicks for a long time in all likelihood. Because the Knicks have had a very public relationship with CAA dating all the way back to Carmelo Anthony and before. So, they were always, I think Leon Rose was always sort of a goal for James Dolan. As far as like the overall like leash that Leon has, I think it's longer than your average Knick GM. Mm-hmm. I think that Dolan really trusts him due to those past ties to CAA and everything. I think that he really has I don't know. I think the freedom that he's given Leon to build like a giant staff really tells me like he's in it for the long haul with Leon.
Sure,
like there doesn't seem to be any of those like long-term nepotism Knicks guys around anymore. It seems like he's really given Leon the ability to like build the staff fully. The Knicks have like really beefed up their analytics department. They've really beefed up their scouting department. He basically, outside of Scott Perry, who he kept, which I think has actually worked out quite well. I think Scott Perry's popular among players, but like outside of him, there's, as far as I know, like pretty much no holdovers in the basketball operations side from before Leon Rose getting there. It's pretty much all new people. So I think that Dolan really is in it for the long haul with him. I think I'm pretty sure that Leon Rose could probably even sell to Dolan this year if the Knicks hit like January and they're really underperforming. At that point, they'll fire Tibbs. I think that Leon could even sell a tank to Dolan this year and say, this is a fantastic draft. We have a lot of draft capital this year. Let's make the most of this for once and try to get a top pick again like we did for RJ. And, then we have RJ locked up already. We have Mitch locked up already. We have Brunson locked up already. We'll do a little strategic resting down the stretch like the Thunder do. And, try to increase our odds as much as possible because a top 5 pick in this draft could potentially alter the course of the franchise.
Sure.
I think that's where they'll end up being. I think there's outside of Leon Rose literally like speaking to the press, which he doesn't do anyway, and saying like, James Dolan is a psychopath and I hate working for him. I don't think there's a single thing he could do to get fired this year. I think he's pretty well safe.
Plus, the New York Rangers are good right now, so Dolan's happy. Like, that's all he wants is the Rangers to be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Priority. I always say to my dad, it's amazing he hasn't screwed them up. They seem very competent always. But yeah, to Alex's point, the Knicks' best case scenario this year is what happened to Toronto in the Tampa year, where it's like a stealth tank, and then you move up a couple spots, and oh look, we got Scottie Barnes. All of a sudden, our future that was like, we're going to be kind of average for a long time is like, no, we're on a really good trajectory. Maybe
worked out all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Odds are always against that, even if you get that high in the draft. But that being said, I'm with Alex. I think the only way the front office is in any danger is a repeat of last year, which ironically, if they don't trade Julius Randle, I think there's a decent chance that you get last year with more wins. But I think if things start heading that direction, this front office is savvy enough to back off of their previous plan, because as much as Knicks fans, myself included, lament Tom Thibodeau and over again kind of scold him for like, he won't play Obi Toppin. And it seems pretty clear on some level that's endorsed by the front office, continuing to bring in these veterans. And then weirdly, on other times, they're not on the same page, like where they trade for Cam Reddish, but there's not a spot in the rotation for him. All that is to say, I think as long as the team is fun, fans don't care, and Dolan doesn't care how many games this team plays. I think it was from Ian Begley, but there was reporting out there that Dolan wasn't particularly upset about the Knicks not getting Donovan Mitchell because he feels as if RJ Barrett is that type of draw for the Knicks already. And now, to be clear, I think Mitchell would have taken it to another level in that he's just flat out one of the most exciting players on the planet. But Barrett brings that attractiveness, and Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin bring that hype. They bring that energy. You actually play all those guys 30 minutes per game. The vibes around the Knicks will be the best that they've been in 10 years and more sustainable than they've been in 25 years. So there's a lot to look forward to. The Knicks just can't lean into their worst tendencies from the past. But Sean, I think that's a fantastic place to wrap this one up. Before we let you go, though, can you remind everyone where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Woodley Schall. It's on the screen there for those watching on YouTube. Last name, first name, because some dude in Australia got Sean Woodley, and I'm working on it, but he's blocked me at this point. You can also, check out Locked On Raptors every day in your favorite podcast apps, and on YouTube. It's doing off-season stuff. We did a lot of Kevin Durant talk in the off-season. That was lovely to keep us going, and now we look ahead to what should be a pretty fun 2022-23 team.
Sean, we get a lot of mean comments on YouTube whenever we talk about the Raptors. Is there any way you can send out a message to Raptors Nation that we're friends? Yeah,
look, the Knicks have been very bad for most of everyone's adult lives at this point. Why you got to be mean? Like, go be mean to Celtics fans. They're the worst. We can all agree on that.
This
Knicks
is what I always say. I've never
truthfully, Knicks fans are the best fans online. You guys are like self-loathing. You hate your team. That's what you want, baby. You guys are the best fans. So, I think if you guys ever got good, it would actually be bad for the vibes of the Knicks fans online, for sure. So, while I'm not rooting for you to be sad all the time, I kind of am, I guess.
I've never understood the whole the hate of the Knicks and Knicks fans either. I'm like, it's just like the national narrative of like, screw the Knicks. So like, kick someone while they're down. Why don't you?
Yeah. We're crapping on ourselves. There's no need for you to do it. I think
that's like, oh man, those Kings fans are so annoying. They're the worst.
They're high and mighty.
Yeah,
20 years without the playoffs.
They think they're the best. Yeah.
At any rate, Sean, make sure to tell them that I had the Raptors as my top draft pick in our futures drafts. So that
there you go. You have that, and also you have that I am their favorite Canadian. So Raptors fans, if you like me, don't be mean to the people whose favorite Canadian is me. So there you go.
To be fair,
we gotta wrap this up.
Yeah,
we can't keep people about this. Sean, thank you so much for Alex. I'm Gavin Schall. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back early next week. Until then, peace out. We'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.